Story recapped here. Today I'm going to explain a drama, horror, and romance film called Wolf. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. One snowy night, Will is driving back home when he suddenly hits a wolf that passes across the road. When he grabs the canine to pull it off the street, it immediately bites him before running away. The next day, Will goes back to work as an editor-in-chief at a publishing house where he gets Mary, his assistant, to schedule him a doctor's appointment to check his wolf bite. On the other hand, Roy, someone else working for him, talks to him about a party at Raymond Alden's estate, the new boss in their publishing house. Because of the change in leadership, many are at risk of losing their jobs, including Will. So, Mary and Roy tell him that they'll also quit if Will gets fired. A little later, Maud, an author signed under their company, drops by to talk with Will. She expresses her feelings about not wanting to write because of the recent changes with the company and wants Will's help. But Will tells her right away that he might lose his job soon, so he can no longer help her. However, Will thinks he still has a bit of leverage because Stuart, one of the company's great employees, is Will's good friend, who says he'll also quit if Will is fired. So, Will introduces Maud to Stuart, who's able to showcase his charms right away. When Maud leaves, Will compliments Stuart for being good at sucking up. At his doctor's appointment, Will gets a rabies shot, but the doctor, Ralph, is a bit dubious because he doesn't think there are any wolves around their area. However, Will is insistent on what he saw. That night, Will goes to the party with his wife, Charlotte. As he expected, someone drops by their table to tell Will that Raymond is expecting him outside. When he goes to talk to his new boss, Will expects to be fired. However, he gets a choice instead. Raymond offers to relocate him to Eastern Europe with a lower position, but Will doesn't decide right away. Other than that, Raymond mentions that Will's successor is someone who begged to have his job. After their conversation, Will walks over to check the horses, but the animals start freaking out in his presence. With a sudden anxiety attack, Will sits down on the stairs to recuperate, where he meets Laura, Raymond Alden's daughter, who gives him a drink. They're quickly acquainted with each other and start talking about Will's position in the company. He confesses that he'd instead take the demotion than lose the job. When he excuses himself, he stumbles and accidentally touches Laura's chest. When she asks whether it was on purpose, he declines and tells Laura that he's married. As Will goes back to the party, he congratulates Stuart, who apparently got the promotion. Stuart feigns innocence as if he didn't just steal Will's job, even saying he didn't ask for it. He tells Will that he won't take the offer without his blessing, but still, Will tells him to do what he wants. The following morning, Will accidentally sleeps through the whole day and wakes up at night, but weirdly enough, he feels great. On the next day, Will starts acting differently and spends a moment of intimacy with Charlotte, something they haven't done in a long time. While getting ready, he notices that he's growing hair around his wolf bite, so he starts trimming it. When Will gets to work, he comes across an employee who smells like tequila, but the man is immediately confused about how Will can tell. As it turns out, Will's senses are starting to heighten. As he arrives in his office to work, Roy drops by to express his frustration towards Will getting replaced by Stuart. But his frustration vanishes when he notices that Will isn't wearing his glasses, something Will didn't even notice. Upon checking his prescription glasses, he realizes that he doesn't need to wear them anymore. When he exits his office, he checks around the building and notices that he also got a heightened sense of hearing. Confused, he calls to find a book about animal possession, thinking that the wolf's spirit might be inside him. Despite the questionable request, Will gets referred to a book written by Dr. Vijav, who seems to be a specialist in the topic. Aside from the book, Will asks for Dr. Vijav's contact number. At home, Will smells something on Charlotte's coat, and immediately goes to confront the problem. He rushes to Stuart's house, who's surprised by his presence. When Stuart tries to grab Will bites his hand. There, he finds out that Charlotte's having an affair with Stuart. Albeit mad, Will just walks away without a word and even moves out of his place right away. The next day, Will devises a plan to take down Stuart and starts ordering Mary to make some calls that'll help him. Will goes to Stuart, who's still trying to pretend that he's friendly with him. Stuart tells him that he'll resign if Will wants him to. This time, Will tells him to quit, which of course is something that Stuart wasn't going to do and only says out of politeness. Stuart offers to give Will a better position, but instead, Will is now dead set on taking down Stuart. Back at his office, he tells Roy and Mary about his plan to defeat Stuart, even bluffing to start his own publishing house. The plan involves calling authors under their company to defame the publishing house's name and urging them to pull out from the company. After this, Will goes to Raymond's place to tell him that he will refuse the Europe offer and doesn't say anything else. Before leaving, he encounters Laura, who uses him as an excuse to get out of lunch with her father. She brings Will to their guest house but doesn't plan on having lunch with him because she doesn't want him to get ideas. However, Will isn't expecting anything but courtesy, so she ends up serving him a PB&J sandwich. Over lunch, Will berates Laura, telling her that she isn't interesting and calls her rude, but Laura just brushes him off. The two spend more time together and start getting closer as they converse in front of the lake. There, Will confesses about his wolf bite and tells Laura that he might be getting wolf-like characteristics, especially with his acute senses. Laura doesn't judge him despite the bizarre tidbit and tells Will that he should welcome the changes if it benefits him. However, Will is worried that there might be a catch. As they go back inside, Will suddenly starts feeling ill, so Laura takes care of him and promises him breakfast in bed. That night, Will wakes up as a werewolf and jumps out the window to chase after a deer. He tackles the deer, snaps its neck, and eats it without hesitation. In the morning, Will wakes up covered in blood. He starts freaking out and rushes to the doctor immediately, not even saying goodbye to Laura. The doctor simply thinks that Will just sleptwalked or had a concussion. He suggests that Will should stay for a CAT scan, but he doesn't want to miss work. So back at the company, he goes to see Raymond about his master plan. Raymond knows about what Will is doing and thinks that his bluff about starting a new company would probably fail. However, Will still has the upper hand because the authors are still willing to join him. So Raymond gives him his position back and even grants him more benefits. Afterward, he meets with Dr. Vijav to ask him about his symptoms. Will tells the doctor what happened, and right away, Dr. Vijav tells him that he's becoming a werewolf. Although Will is dubious, he entertains the man's theories. Dr. Vijav also tells him that the wolf rests during the day and prowls during the night. After much thought, Will asks whether there's a way to stop his change. Although he can't fully help Will, Dr. Vijav gives him an amulet that'll help suppress it for a bit if he's wearing it. But in return, Dr. Vijav asks Will to bite him because he's dying and would rather be cursed than perish. Back at home, Will doesn't wear the amulet and just hangs it on his mirror. He calls Laura right after, but she immediately hangs up on him. Still, Will is adamant about explaining why he disappeared. Will tells her that he sleepwalked, knocked himself unconscious, and then went to the doctor. However, Laura is upset that he didn't tell her right away. Fortunately, she gives him another chance to meet up at his place tomorrow evening. But that night, Will wakes up with his wolf desires once more. He breaks inside a zoo, hoping to have a meal, but the police immediately catch him. As they try to detain Will, he jumps over the walls to escape, taking the handcuffs with him. On his way home, he encounters a group of thugs that try to rob him, but instead, he ends up attacking the young guys. The following day, Will doesn't have much recollection of the night before. When he goes to work, he meets with Raymond to sign the contract of getting his old job back. Right away, Will goes to see Stuart to rub the news on his face, even if they're in the bathroom. Stuart tries to be coy about it, acting nonchalant as he congratulates Will, but he's not buying the civil act anymore and fires Stuart. He pleads for Will to reconsider, but he has already made up his mind. Will even pees on Stuart's shoes, saying he's marking his territory. When Stuart leaves, Will goes to wash his hands, but finds peculiar items in his belongings, such as a bloody rag and 2 fingers. Will immediately freaks out and goes back to his place, but he encounters Charlotte in the lobby. Shamelessly, she pleads for Will to take her back, but he doesn't want anything to do with Charlotte anymore. When he gets to his room, he wears the amulet right away. Soon, Laura arrives at his doorstep, but he doesn't want to see her, worried he might endanger her. But Laura is just as stubborn and gets a cleaning lady to open the lock. Inside, she sees Will handcuffing himself to the radiator. Laura thinks he's being ridiculous and picks the lock on his cuffs. Despite being convinced that he's a werewolf, Laura tries to reassure him that it might just be a tumor. After setting him free, they spend the night together with deep passion. But just as he expected, Will goes out that night and starts howling at the moon, acting like a werewolf. But still, he comes back to cuddle with Laura. The next day, the police come knocking on their door. Detective Bridger is looking for Will, so Laura lets him in. Turns out, Charlotte has been found dead last night and tells Will that she was murdered with her throat torn up. Detective Bridger starts questioning Will, but Laura immediately steps in to save Will, knowing that the detective is simply baiting Will by not asking straight questions. So she steps in as his alibi, certain that they've been together all night. Alternatively, the detective asks for DNA samples from Will to cross-examine it with what they found, but again, Laura just brushes him off without a court order. Before leaving, Detective Bridger tells them to drop by the station for their statements. Meanwhile, Stuart and Raymond see the news report about Charlotte's death. They immediately worry about the company's reputation, hoping it won't affect business due to Will's connection to the case. Raymond rehires Stuart to take care of their marketing to ease his worries. But of course, Stuart is still adamant about stealing Will's position, so he plans to make him look guilty. On the other hand, Will is worried that he might have killed Charlotte, thinking he turned into a werewolf and forgot about it again. But Laura feels confident that Will is innocent. That is, until she sees Will's shoes and sees mud and dirt on them. She realizes that he actually might have gone out last night. Still, Laura goes back to their estate to hide Will. He even requests to get locked up in the barn so that he won't endanger anyone at night. But before that, Laura gets a call from Detective Bridger asking for her statement. This time, Laura is more willing to cooperate because of her theories. She asks whether they still want DNA samples from Will, but the detectives refuse, saying that they found canine DNA on the samples. Even though the detectives think it's from a regular dog, Laura thinks otherwise. Finally, she accepts the reality of Will's condition. However, she doesn't run away in fear. She's still determined to help Will. She locks Will in the barn before going down to the station. There, she encounters Stuart, who's also going to give a statement about the case. As he introduces himself as a close friend of Will's, Laura can tell that he's acting differently, especially because he keeps sniffing her. Immediately, Laura can tell that he's also turning into a werewolf. Stuart asks her out, so she plays along and agrees. However, when Stuart gets called in by the detective, Laura immediately runs away to drive back to Will. Furthermore, she also charters a plane for both of them. On the other hand, Stuart gives a false, exaggerated statement to make Will look guilty. He mentions his affair with Charlotte and how Will became a madman when he found out. Stuart even tells them about Will biting him and urinating on his shoe, and says Will wanted to kill Charlotte. After his statement, Stuart chases after Laura when he realizes that she ran away. Back at the barn, Will's amulet is working well because he's still in his human form. When Laura arrives, she tells their guard not to let anyone in without a call. So, when Stuart arrives, the guard won't let him pass. In desperation, Stuart just drives through the gates and runs over the guard. Now in his werewolf form, Stuart starts looking for Laura and Will. He even kills another guard that he comes across. As Laura gets ready to escape with Will, she encounters the dead guard's body. Suddenly, Stuart grabs her from behind and tries to coerce her into sleeping with him. Laura plays it cool, then knees him on the groin to escape. She runs inside the barn and uses a fire extinguisher to hit Stuart. But when Laura tries to free Will, Stuart immediately tackles her and throws away the keys. With no other choice but to fight fire with fire, Will rips off his amulet to welcome his werewolf form. As Stuart tries to force himself on Laura, Will climbs over the cage to save her. He wrestles against Stuart, who isn't going down without a fight. Will starts overpowering Stuart, so the latter starts to run outside. However, Will chases him and throws him on the stairs. Thinking the fight is over, Will starts walking away, but Stuart hasn't given up. When he sees the opportunity, he grabs a grass cutter to attack Will from behind, but Laura saves him by shooting Stuart repeatedly until he dies. Afterward, she collapses in terror, making Will try to comfort her, but his appearance has already drastically changed. Even though Laura accepts him, he runs away. A few moments later, the police arrive at the estate alongside Raymond. There, Laura comes out acting innocently. She says she doesn't know what happened, nor does she know Will's whereabouts. Once more, the detective tells Laura to come to the station for a statement. As she walks away, she asks Detective Bridger if he wants another vodka tonic, saying that she can smell the alcohol on him from a mile away. With her senses slowly heightening, Laura is also starting to turn into a werewolf. On the other hand, Will has already fully transformed into an actual wolf.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.